I've always had this weird knack for staying out of trouble. It's difficult to explain, but whether it be a feeling, a sense, a tingling, it's just always been there, for as long as I can remember. I wish I could say it always made sense, or that there was always an aha moment where I understood what just happened, or even that it was a little less terrifying when it does happen. But that's rarely the case. I just know that it always seems to work. I'd like to tell you about one of the less vague times it happened to me. Back in my early 20s, in the late 90s, I decided I needed a change. I left my childhood home and I moved in with my uncle on the other side of the state for a couple of months. Just enough time to get a job, find an apartment, and get myself situated for college. This was a big move for me. I'd spend a lot of time traveling, but I'd never lived more than 10 miles from where I was born. It was both exciting and scary. Scales tipped more towards exciting. We lived in a backwoods town that few people have ever heard of, even now. But it was close enough to a few major cities in Florida. When I told people where I lived, I would just say between Gainesville and St. Augustine, rather than go through the whole "you live where?" conversation. It's a rural area. Not much more than red clay and a bunch of dried up old lakes well past their prime. When giving people directions to the house, we actually tell them, every turn you come to, just take the one with the hard road. The first intersection without a hard road, turn right. 2 blocks past that, on the left, and it's the only house on that side. I don't think I ever even learned the names of all those roads. I just aimed for all the hard roads. The house itself, it was pretty secluded. I don't think there was much neighbourhood behind the house, just woods. The property, it sat on an intersection of clay roads, with woods across the street to the front, and one side of the house. The other side was an empty lot, and then even more woods. I remember it was a pretty big yard, maybe half an acre or so, completely enclosed with a chain-link fence. The house sat in the middle of the property. If you walked to the front edge of the yard inside the fence, you could see the neighbour's driveway a little farther up on the road on the other side. My uncle, he loved the place, not being able to see or hear anyone in any direction. Me? I thought it was creepy as hell. It was a small house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. The living room had 2 exit doors, one to the front and one to the side. Each led out to a large porch. I know it's not a good thing, but I'm a smoker. Like a freight train kind of smoker. It's a family thing, an unhealthy curse handed down by each generation. It's like you weren't even considered an adult until you had sat on Grandma's porch and smoked with her. That's how you spent time with Grandma. You sat on the front porch, chain smoked, and talked about whatever needed talking about. I sure do miss that woman. I've never cared for smoking in the house, and my uncle was trying to quit. So we set up a little smoking table and a couple of chairs on his front porch. He was an early to rise and early to bed kind of guy, and I was just the opposite. I didn't go to bed until 2 or 3 each morning, And then I slept in until 10 or 11. The hours you keep working at a restaurant, I guess. So, I spent most of my evenings after work on that porch, usually reading a book or talking on the phone to friends back home. There wasn't much road traffic to speak of, even less after I came in from work. It was summer, and my cousin, my uncle's son from his first marriage, had come to spend a couple of weeks with his dad. We're a pretty tight-knit family, so the kid, aka little man, was more my little brother than a cousin. He was around 4 or 5 years old at the time. The house only had the 2 bedrooms, so we set up a pallet of blankets on the floor in the living room for him. I made a fort out of it every night before he went to sleep, stretching a sheet between the couch and coffee table over his head. There were big windows next to either of the doors going outside, and the blinds were old and kind of dog-chewed, so he liked to be covered up at night. I wasn't sure if it was so he couldn't see outside, or if he was worried something was outside seeing him. Either way, I could sympathise. On this particular night, I put into bed and retired to the front porch. I called a friend of mine back home and proceeded to talk the night away. Kinda weird, the things we did before cell phones. We actually talked to people. I miss it sometimes. It was a typically warm southern night, mid-80s temperature, not a breath of a breeze, and humid. Nights out there could really go either way. You either had a cacophony of frogs, crickets, catchers, and the occasional alligator, or worse, you couldn't hear yourself think over the silence. The chorus of nightlife was going strong that evening, which is actually pretty cool. If you've never heard it, each type of insect or critter sings together, matching the rest in volume and cadence, and then one crescendos, briefly shutting out the others before going back down to rejoin the chorus. Every so often, you'll hear a couple of competing solos getting louder and louder until one wears out. It's mostly background stuff, and you usually tune it out, but it's neat to stop and listen. Until it just stops. That was how it started. I'm talking on the phone, mostly listening, honestly. The critters are singing in the background, and I remember feeling just the briefest chill. Not enough to really notice at first. But then, everything went quiet. It didn't fade or lower in volume. It all just stopped. The chill settled in. My friend was still talking. I could hear his voice in my ear, but I was not listening anymore. I was staring into the wooded lot across the street. There wasn't anything to see over there, but I couldn't look away. I don't know if it was my uncle, a previous owner, or maybe the county, but there was a sodium vapor streetlight in front of my house, just outside of the chain link fence, a little to my right as I stared out there. It gave a decent amount of light to the front of the house, and it was really nice when you were bringing groceries in from your car after dark. But this night really underscored my issue with the light. The bulb itself, it was mounted directly to the pole, rather than extending away from it. An extension of some type would have provided more light in either direction, I think. The way the bulb housing hugged the pole itself, hard shadows ran behind the pole across the street. Complete darkness spreading in a 90-degree arc behind the light pole. I guess it's the juxtaposition of the light versus dark in that part of the yard. But the space behind the light pole was the darkest part of the night. And that's where I was looking. I tried to shake it off. Admittedly, I can get creeped out pretty easily. I've seen a lot of weird stuff, and I know I can scare myself without much help. So I tried to just ignore it and get back into the conversation. I opened my mouth to say something, to chime into whatever we were talking about with something witty, I'm sure.
Be quiet.
It's not exactly a voice, but sometimes it comes across as one. I knew there was no one actually talking to me, just my brain reacting to and dealing with something. So, I'm well aware it's my own head when I hear a voice like that, just to be clear. But when I do hear it, I listen. This is that thing I mentioned when I started. What always keeps me out of trouble. And it wasn't the first time I'd heard it. I could hear my friend going on through the phone, but it was distant. I could also hear something across the street. That was the summer of 1998, and it was a North Florida summer marked by drought and fires. The underbrush, it was dry and crisp. Something over there had just taken a step through it. I didn't really know what to do. I could feel my heart beating in my temples. It felt like something was looking at me, through me. It was uncomfortable, and more than a little invasive feeling. I didn't like it. I wanted to go inside.
Don't move.
Okay, we aren't moving. Check. Done. My friend was telling me about a new restaurant back home. How he and a few of our other friends had been and liked it a lot. We needed to go when I could visit again. And he stopped by to see my mum the other day and had a great time at the house.
It can hear him.
A dry twig cracked under its weight. I couldn't just hang up on him. If I did, he was going to call back. It struck me as a very bad thing to have the phone ring while I was out there. My hand was shaking, holding the phone to my head. Listen, I have to go," I whispered. He went to say something else, but I cut him off. "That thing is happening right now. I have to go. Something is out here. I'll call you later." "Be careful," he said, and hung up. He and I were close friends, had been for years, and he knew exactly what I meant. I clicked the phone off, and I put it on the table. It was one of those big, curved, cordless models with the stubby little antenna. I remember them being very popular back then. Worried he would call back, or I'd be killed because of some weird wrong number calling at 2 o'clock. I flipped the ringer to off. Another step sounded from across the street, and then another. It was walking faster now, and it was definitely closer than when I first heard it. I braced myself, ready to jump up from the chair and run inside the house.
"Don't. It's watching."
So I didn't. I listened. I just listened. I can't even explain how much I wanted to just up and run right then. There was an exhale. I don't really know how to explain it. Not a snort or a grunt, but a hard exhale. And then a scrape Another step.
Get inside.
I damn near turned the table over as I jumped up from the chair and ran from the door. It was only a few steps, but it seemed like I'd never make it. And it really didn't help that I could hear the thing across the street break into a run. Twigs and branches snapping and crunching. Something broke over there. I guess as it ran through a bush or a low-hanging branch. Now, it was out of the woods. There was a thumping as its feet hit the hard-baked clay road. Right as I made it inside the door and got it shut behind me, I heard the clang of the chain-link fence as something hit its top rail, surely vaulting over top and into our yard.
Lock the door.
I'd barely twisted the deadbolt in the door when the voice came again.
Turn off the light.
The single light in the living room was from a weirdly elaborate light fixture attached to the ceiling fan. I called it the Venus flytrap for the strange, flowery stained glass petals surrounding the bulbs, which always tinted the light to a pale green. I grabbed the pull cord and killed the light. Something hit the door from outside. It sounded like whatever had been running at me just headbutted the door. That was the picture in my head, at least. I don't know how I didn't make a noise. It scared me so bad. The blinds shook in the window beside the door, a dry rustling sound as they rubbed the wood in the frame.
Hide.
I thought about going in my room, which was the furthest point in the house from that door. But my cousin was sound asleep on the living room floor. I wasn't about to leave him out there by himself, but waking him up seemed like just as bad an idea. Another angry pounding against the door. The blinds shook again. I wondered how securely fastened they were to the top of the frame. What if they fell? What if they fell off the window and I ended up face to face with something outside, staring at me? All I could think was if that happened, the street light would be to its back, lighting up the house, and I wouldn't be able to see it with the light in my eyes. I don't know why I even thought about that, but it scared the hell out of me. I got down on the floor, and I climbed into the fort we'd made earlier, between the couch and the coffee table. It seemed as good a spot as any. Little man stirred a bit as I settled in next to him, but he didn't wake up. More banging on the porch. Sounded like the table was being dragged and pulled across the wood floor out there. Another bang. And under all of that, the best word to describe it: breathing. It was somewhere between a snort or a growl, something that was out of breath. A quick snarl, punctuated by more banging furniture. It slammed into the door again and growled. To say I was scared is a monstrous understatement. I didn't know what the hell to do. What if it stopped hitting the door and started hitting the window? The voice in my head was quiet though. As much as I could, I trusted that it would be saying something if there was anything that I should be doing. I laughed at myself for waiting on the voices in my head to tell me what to do. I probably didn't laugh right at that exact moment, but you get the idea. It jumped off the porch. I don't really know how to explain that sound, except that you could hear or feel its weight on the wood planks out there. And then, it was not there. Straining my ears to hear something, anything. All I could think was that it was gone. It was going to leave us alone. And then suddenly, slam. This one, from the door to the side of the living room. I didn't hear it over there before it hit the door. I think I might have yelped or something when it hit. Little man shook a little, but he was still sleeping. A couple more scrapes and bangs outside, and now it was panting. Again, I'm wondering about that window. It felt like luck that it hadn't hit the one on the front porch. Too much to hope for that it wouldn't find the one on the side porch. But it didn't. Maybe a minute or two later, or really, my perception of time was so screwed up, it could have been half a minute or half an hour. It was gone. I heard it jump down again. Its breathing faded. I braced myself for another bang, but all was quiet. I don't know how long I lay there, hugging little man to me. Not really sure who was comforting / protecting who for that next little while. And I eventually fell asleep, waking up to the smells of breakfast and coffee. The previous night came back to me pretty quickly. I was happy to see everyone up and around. Both my uncle and little man were up, and I felt more than just a little silly climbing out from under the blanket fort. My uncle just grinned at me, said he'd slept in the living room with the little guy a few times himself. I went for the door, really needing that first smoke of the morning. Felt like I'd earned it. Little man, he stopped me on the way out. Surprised me. Just came up and hugged me. I had to kneel down to catch him, so he wasn't just hugging my knees. It was a good hug, deep and heartfelt. He pulled away from me, looked at me like I don't think a kid has ever looked at me. "I'm really glad you're okay," he said. "I had a bad dream that you were outside and you got eaten by the monster across the street." I think all my blood froze right then. I don't know if I wanted to laugh or cry. I told him that I was just fine. No monsters for me. They don't think I taste good. He laughed and he was done with it. He was back in the kitchen, helping his dad with breakfast. And me, I really needed to smoke. It was my last scare of the morning, but it was a good one. Not really sure what I was expecting, but the yard around the house was like a war zone. My smoking table was in pieces. Parts of it in front of the house, other parts on the side of the house, and one of the legs was out on the road. One of the chairs near disintegrated, and we never found the other one. We kept a big metal bucket full of sand on the side of the front porch. The butt bucket, we called it. It was on its side in the far back corner of the yard. It weirded me out that the sand and collection of butts, previously inside said bucket, were nowhere near the house or the bucket, but in the front corner of the yard. No matter how many times I've thought this through, that part never really made much sense. How did that thing get the bucket to the backyard? Why were the contents of it dumped in the front yard? What the hell was it that it could have carried the bucket to the front to dump it? My uncle, he saw me checking out the yard, and he came out the front door to join me. I remember he whistled when he came out, surprised to see the yard. It's funny now, and I think I nervous laughed then. He asked if I was throwing parties after he went to bed every night. He cocked an eyebrow at me and rubbed at a fresh dent in the front door. Not quite. I wasn't sure what to do. Still, so I told him everything that happened the night before. To be honest, I really thought he was going to laugh at me, make fun of me for my overactive imagination, and I was never going to hear the end of it. But he didn't. Instead, he told me that he'd had a couple of weird things happen to him out here. Said it really bothered him coming home after dark, and that he hated not being able to see across the street because of that street light, and that he'd seen things on the edge of the fence, but mostly across the street. We went back inside, and he showed me where he kept 2 of his rifles and 1 of his handguns, well out of sight, but easy to reach in a hurry. We went back out and cleaned the mess left in the yard. He said that with the national forest on just about all sides of us, there were lots of animals we weren't used to out there. There were plenty of bobcats, coyotes, panthers, even bears. And God only knew what else. I agreed, taking some comfort in that. My overactive imagination paired with a real-life animal. Yeah, that was going to be scary. And I really wish he'd stopped there. I think it's something else though, he said. Whatever it is out here, it feels smarter than that. I think it knows us. I don't think I'll ever forget him saying that. I tried to get him to say more, but he wouldn't, and he wouldn't ever speak about it again. I was only there another couple of weeks. Thankfully, uneventful weeks. And when I left, I never went back to that house. Something about it after that night just didn't feel right. I wish I had more to tell you, or a better explanation for exactly what happened that night. But that's just how it happened.